Previously on GameHammer Daily. What a fantastic game. I have to admit, it's not quite as good as Metal Slug 3, which is the one that I started with, but then again, not much is as good as Metal Slug 3. And now... Report!
General Morton is back and he's attacking the game room, Captain.
That's not good news.
I don't think anyone's going to argue with that, Captain.
There's only one way out of this mess. Load Metal Slug 3! In Metal Slug 2, we fought the forces of General Morden and foiled his dastardly plans to take over the world. He teamed up with a buttload of alien monsters to achieve his plans, and we kicked their backsides. It was a good time. Oh, and if all of that talk about aliens in an army shooter isn't too much for you, then I suggest you tap out now, because Morden is back, and so are the aliens. And this time they've brought zombies with them. Oh my goodness! It's all very weird, very wacky, and very good fun. Originally released for the Neo Geo in arcades, Metal Slug 3 has been ported to the PS2, the Xbox, the Wii, the Switch, and the PC. It's had quite a life after its arcade origins. You get to play as one of 4 characters, each with their own look, but mostly with the same play style. You also get the chance to choose your own path to the boss through several branching routes on each level. It's a nice addition, and it adds a lot of replay value. Which path you prefer will ultimately depend on the enemies and items you're most likely to encounter on each path. I have my preferences, you'll have yours, but since we all end up at the same boss fight, it's really just a case of choosing which route you know you can beat so that you can get through the game, or, if you're more adventurous, finding a new path and seeing how many times you die before you get to the end of it. But on your way, do remember to pick up the weapons that you prefer. For me, it's always the heavy machine gun, because it's awesome, and also to rescue as many of the POWs as you can, since they give you bonus points at the end of the level, and occasionally drop nice items. So we start the game as we mean to go on, with a full frontal assault of the enemy base. Which enemy? The aliens. Morden's old allies have established a beachhead, and you're going to have to battle your way through them if you want to save the Earth. While playing through this stage, you'll see that the controls are exactly the same as in the previous Metal Slug games. They work very nicely, although I'm still not able to get to grips with shooting diagonally. I don't know what it is, I just can't do it in this game. You can actually shoot diagonally, I've seen it happen. It's just a bit tricky to get used to, thanks to the game's reliance on the D-pad, rather than full analog controls. Anyway, once you get through the first wave of enemies, you enter a boat section, which is a lot of fun. Leap from enemy boat to enemy boat, fighting Morden's troops and dodging bombs that are dropped on parachutes. It's a huge amount of fun, and the weird crab tank at the end of the stage is an excellent boss fight. I cannot overemphasize how much fun this stage is. It's frenetic, it's inventive, and it's just plain fun. This is Metal Slug at its best, in my view. After you defeat the boss, you come to Mission 2. Now, I will admit, when I first played this game, Mission 2 was by far the one I disliked the most. It slows the pace of the game down a lot compared to the first mission, and I didn't feel the zombies fit with the story. After playing the game through multiple times since then, however, I have to say the slower pace for this mission still irks me. But my other complaints are pretty much gone. The style is cool, the music is amazing, and the way your character can turn into a zombie when they're killed is actually quite inventive. I adore the beam effect range attack you get as a zombie as well. It's very useful in killing multiple enemies at once, which helps you to keep going through the level at a more reasonable pace. The boss battle on this mission is just plain weird though. Multiple giant, ugly looking aliens floating in a circle and giant tombstones falling from the sky. It's one of the oddest things I've ever seen in gaming for a very long time. And I'm not kidding, just look how weird these things are. Anyway, after that, we get a cool underwater section with a tiny submarine. The animation and graphics are great, they continue to be exceptional. The Lean Claire inspired style on these games is nothing short of perfection. Sadly, the controls aren't. You can either move or change the direction that your sub's cannons fire in, but not both. this section could really do with an upgrade to be a twin-stick shooter. But after that, you get into a platform section in a warehouse, which is more run-and-gun action like the rest of the game, and it's still just as good as ever. The boss battle with a giant robot is also fantastic. Next up, it's a desert battle, followed by a building full of the piranha plants from the Mario games, which is just weird. What are they doing here? But the boss fight this time is against a giant floating stone head, which shoots diamonds out of a gem in its forehead. Very strange. It's just as weird as it sounds, but once you get the hang of the attack pattern, it is actually a simple fight. Next up is great. We have a flying mission where the little aeroplane you're in is just as annoying to control as the submarine, and again, this needs to be a twin-stick shooter, but get through it and you'll get to the launch pad for Morden's space program. Yeah, he's got a space program, and this is where things get more interesting. Suddenly, the game is a vertically scrolling shooter, and it is amazing. Of all the levels, this is my favourite by far. I'm a real lover of vertical shooters. When your ship inevitably explodes, because I might love these shooters, but I'm not that good at them, you will get out of it and kick ass in a spacesuit instead. It's fantastic, it just keeps the action going. Once you defeat the giant spaceship at the end of this mission, it's time to take the fight to the alien menace. You're deep in enemy territory now, so get ready for lots of weird aliens that look fantastic. One of them is basically a Poundland Dalek with a brain in the jar on top of it, and I love it. So let's fight our way through these alien monsters until we reach the final twist in the tale, because it turns out that Morden's forces aren't all on his side this time. After spending so long seeing their leader cozy up to monsters from outer space, some of them have joined forces with you, and now you've got allies to assist you in your assault on the alien leader. They're not actually all that useful to you, but it's nice they tried, you know? And when you finally reach the giant alien brain monster that's leading the enemy assault, they will be about as useful as a snowball in a gunfight, so you're going to have to blow this thing up yourself. But isn't that what all of these games are about anyway? So it's not like you weren't expecting this, were you? Give it a good kicking and you'll save the world once more. It's been a hell of a ride, hasn't it? Anyway, this is by far the best Metal Slug game in the whole series as far as I'm concerned. It's just a shame that Morden would keep coming back for more, really, isn't it? Which reminds me, I need to give that guy what for, since he's invading the Earth again. So, cartoon powers, activate!
Mission start.
Morden, stop invading the Earth. It's naughty.
Make me.
Very well, you leave me no choice.
Mission complete.
Well, that was a disappointment.
That wasn't even my final form.
Well, that's unexpected. This calls for something special. By the power of Game Nerd, I have the GameHammer! Hiya!
Mission complete. For real this time.
My goodness, that was a bit of intensity, wasn't it? Christmas time, arguing online. Which is better, whiskey or moonshine?
What are you doing?
Being annoying on the internet. What does it look like?
Well, it's time you stopped.
That's what everyone says. You know, you're just going with the crowd, dude. You've got to branch out and form your own opinions.
What? No, stop trying to change the subject.
What subject? I don't even know why you're here. What are you on about?
I've come to give you your new game to review this week. Here.
The Bible game? I know literally nothing about this. Is it any good?
That's what you're about to find out. Now get to it.
The Bible game is a party game with a bit of a Christian tint, let's put it that way. It's one of those games that is in the style of Buzz, and if you had a PlayStation 2 hooked up to your TV in the late 2000s, you probably have heard of Buzz. It's one of those games that just seemed to be everywhere for a long time. You played it with the clickers? You don't have to do that with the Bible game, you play it with a controller. It's by Crave Entertainment. Bit of a shock, that one, isn't it? The guys who imported Tokyo Extreme Racer, that entire series, also made this religious game. So, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, but it's a religious game, it can't be any good, can it? Well, that's where you'd be wrong. Because actually, it turns out this is a lot of fun.
Are you ready to do unto others?
The game is themed as if it's a Christian game show on TV, and it sticks with that throughout. As you'd expect, the show opens with the clean-cut presenter guy coming in and introducing the contestants. Then the fun begins. A player is picked at random to start the game, and they control the game board. They choose one of the numbered boxes on the screen, which are highlighted in a random order, and will either get a trivia question, which everyone gets to try to answer, a challenge, which everyone gets to play, a single-player challenge, which only they get to play, or one of several bonus options. There's also one option that players really won't want to see turn up. The Wrath of God option takes all the points that you've earned in this round, and then the round just ends immediately. This can make or break your chances to win the game, so you best hope that this one doesn't come up on your turn. If you thought calling a point-losing event the Wrath of God was verging a little bit on the blasphemous side, well, it's because that does seem a bit that way, doesn't it? Everything in this game is Bible-themed, and some of it, yeah, it gets a little close to landing in the zone where you can't really tell if it's just uninformed or if they're really trying to push things too far. It's a bit weird. So the quiz questions range from the basic stuff, such as where did Adam and Eve live? Hint, it's not the Garden of Brussels sprouts, and yes, that is the level of the humour in this game, because that is a possible answer, to the kind of questions that you're only going to know if you know the Bible pretty well. As someone who only barely remembers what they were taught in the religious education lessons at school, I was surprised that I got a few of these right. Mind you, there are only 4 possible answers to each question, so even if you have to guess, you have a 25% chance of getting it right. And those are good odds. But it's not the trivia where this game excels, it's the challenges. If you remember the weird game shows that used to be on Saturday morning kids TV, the kind of game show that I always wanted to go on but never seemed to be able to, well, you're going to be right at home if you like those, because that's the style of these mini-games. A party game like this lives and dies based on the quality of its mini-games, and I'm happy to say the ones in the Bible game are actually surprisingly good fun. They're all themed around events from the Bible, but they veer so close to an in-name only adaptation that even people who aren't Christian will enjoy these games. There's one based on the Fall of the Walls of Jericho, which is basically just a racing game. You'll have to ride your horse as fast as you can, dodging obstacles on the ground and avoiding the other players. The more obstacles you avoid, and the longer you stay in front of the other players, the more points you gain. Then there's the Tower of Babel game, which is basically just the arcade game Kicks, only with 4 simultaneous players. Now, Kicks is a lot of fun in and of itself, but with the short time limit that comes in here, it becomes an intense experience, and is probably my favourite of all the mini-games on show. But a close contender to the Tower of Babel game for my favourite is Destroy False Idols. This is where you compete with the other players to kick as many statues of Egyptian deities into a fiery pit as possible within the time limit. When I said this game comes close to going too far with its themes, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. The minigames are all time limited with a short time limit, and that means they don't outstay their welcome, which is good. There's also enough of them that you won't keep having to play the same thing over and over again, but not so many that when you find one that you really like, you won't have to wait too long for it to come up again in the mix. So it's a nice, fun balance. At the end of each minigame, you're awarded some points. These don't add to your total until the end of the round, which adds that nice little bit of extra tension, because you could gain more points at any time, or you could lose some of them, or you could lose all of them before the round ends. Once it does, though, any points you have left are added to your bank. When they're in the bank, those points are safe. Playing all the rounds will take you about half an hour, so it's the length of an average TV show. It really doesn't outstay its welcome in terms of games, which is good. Every round follows the same format. A player selects a box on the screen, a quiz, challenge or bonus happens, then the player gets to either select another box or pass the control to another player. Knowing when to risk another turn or pass the game on to the next player is where some tactics come in. If the number of boxes on the board is low, you know the chances of getting the Wrath of God option when you select a box is increasing. If you have a lot of points, it's worth passing control off to the next player, because if you get Wrath of God, you will lose all of those points, and that's not good. But if your points for this round are low, maybe it's worth taking the chance and risking them all, because that's got to be worth a shot to get back into the lead, surely. The final round is the only one where things change up. In this round, there is only one mini-game and no trivia. You have to find fruits on the tree of knowledge. The more fruit you find, the higher your end score will be. This is where a player who's in last place can make up some points, or where someone who's in close second could skip forward a bit and take the lead. Each player takes their turn, and the board resets for every player, so whoever goes first doesn't reduce the chances for those who come after them. There are 8 positions on the tree, but only 6 fruit to find. The other 2 positions contain a snake, and if you select the snake, your turn ends. When this round ends, the points are tallied up, and the person with the most points wins. Very simple. So what do they win? Nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. It's just, you're playing for the fun of playing. It's weird. It's not even a case of, oh, those points, they turned out to be a monetary value and the winning character gets that money. There's not even something that you can unlock. It's just points. The points mean nothing. Just one of those things, you're playing to play. It's a bit of an oddity, but it kind of works and it kind of sticks with the theme. You're not here to, in terms of the game anyway, you're not here to win cash, you're not here to win prizes. You're here to play a game. So you play. Hope you enjoyed it. But funnily enough, you will enjoy it because it's weird. It's one of those strange situations. I am not Christian. Most of you probably aren't all that religious either. But you will find something fun in this game because it's an enjoyable experience. And that's what it all comes down to. Now, you might remember a couple of years ago, wow, time's passed, hasn't it? A couple of years ago, I played a game called VeggieTales, Larry Boy and the Bad Apple. Well, guess who made that game? Yep, it's Crave again. So they've now made 2 religious games for the PS2, and both have turned out to be really good fun. They aren't preachy, they're basically gameplay first and the Christian message second, which is the way that really you should be, because if you've ever seen some of the religious games that were out on the NES, for example, oh, you don't want that. You want gameplay first, and that's what this gives you. So it turns out the religious games on the PlayStation 2 are actually really good. Well worth tracking down, good thing to have in. They're good for kids, they're good for adults who just want a simple game to play. Really good fun. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this, and if you have, remember to click that like button, share the videos so that other people know a good game when they see it, and, of course, until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer, have a very Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Hello and welcome to another episode of GameHammer. It's the final episode of the year, so we have to do our traditional thing. We have to look back on one year from the past and decide which game from that year was Game of the Year. Now the rules for this are simple. I go through the top 3 home computer systems that were out in the UK at the time, and from those 3 I select one of the magazines about that machine. Usually the leading magazine, the one that people in the UK would agree, yes, that was the magazine for that system. I then look at the charts for that magazine for the year in question. This year, it's 1987, and I find which games topped the charts. Tally all those games up, and any that have 2 or more, not necessarily consecutive, but 2 or more times that they got to the top of the charts, they get into round 1 of this contest. So, this year, we have the Amstrad, the Spectrum, and the Commodore. We take those, and any games that got to the top of the charts 2 or more times in 1987 for those computers, they go into round 1. For round 1, I will then pit all of the games for each system against one another. So the Amstrad games are against the Amstrad games, Spectrum games against Spectrum, Commodore's games against Commodore. One of those games for each system will be the game for that system to go through to round 2. I'll pick the best of those ones. Then, in round 2, I pit those final 3 games against one another. One of those is going to come in first place out of all 3 of those. And that will be Game of the Year for 1987. So we're going to do this alphabetically in terms of computer. So that means we're starting with the Amstrad Cpc. Let's see what old Arnold has to offer. Amstrad Action is the premier magazine for the Amstrad Cpc, but in 1987 Amstrad Action still didn't have a monthly chart, so we're going to have to go with a different magazine, and I've chosen for this year Amstrad Computer User, the official magazine, but it's carrying the Gallup charts, so the charts are independent, and as a result we get some accurate gaming charts for what was big and what was selling well on the Amstrad in 1987. So, in January we had an interesting one. It's Compilation Hits Volume 3 by Beaujolais. Or is that Beaujolais? I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's Beaujolais. And after that we got Trivial Pursuit, which, if we hadn't included the Compilation Hits Volume 3, because it's a compilation rather than a standard actual computer game, we would have had the second month in a row for Trivial Pursuit. But we do include Compilation Hits because we take whatever's at the top spot. Next up, for March and April, we have Gauntlet by US Gold, but it was then knocked off the top spot by Ninja from Mastertronic, which was then knocked off the top spot by another compilation, Big 4, from Jarrell. That was then subsequently knocked off the top by Bmx Simulator from Codemasters, followed by Grand Prix Simulator by Codemasters, and then Ghost Hunters by Codemasters, before Bmx Simulator by Codemasters knocked it back off the top. After that we got an entry from Paperboy by Elite, followed by Cricket International from Addictive. Wow, it was certainly a good year for Codemasters, wasn't it? They got the #1 spot 4 months in a row. Gauntlet and Bmx Simulator are the only ones that got 2 #1 spots, however, so they go forward into the contest. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting Bmx Simulator to be as good as it was. I often overlook the simulator series from Codemasters because they never felt like they played all too well back in the 80s, when the Amstrad was my day-to-day system. But coming back to play it now, it's actually quite a lot of fun. At its core, it's a simple one-screen game with a lot of colours and a decent soundtrack, which is exactly the kind of game that the Amstrad Cpc handles very well. The controls are decent enough, although they will take a little getting used to on the corners, because, wow, your bike really can move quickly. The computer-controlled opponents will be far more skilled than you, unless you put in a lot of effort to get good. But I think this is one game which will actually reward the practice you end up putting into it, because the courses are fun and the game is a decent single-player experience, even if it's really geared up to be a 2-player game. The Amstrad often got the short end of the stick when it came to big-name ports of games, because we would often be handed a hastily converted copy of a Spectrum game. If we were lucky, it would be a hastily coloured port of a Spectrum game, but that's not the case with US Gold's port of Gauntlet. This is a colourful, well-coded game with smooth scrolling, great graphics, decent sound and excellent gameplay. The CPC really did get a good game with this one. It slows down here and there when there's a lot going on, but to be honest with you, every Amstrad owner has become used to that over the years because, well, that's just what happens when your computer's clocked at 4 MHz. As arcade game ports go, however, Gauntlet captures all the fun and all the cool visuals of the original, and it's a must-play for action arcade fans. So this ended up being a more difficult decision than I expected. Although we do only have 2 games to choose from on the PC, they were both excellent in their own ways. In the end though, I think the variety of level design on offer in Gauntlet wins out, even though the gameplay loop on offer in that arcade port is just as limited as the gameplay loop in the Bmx Simulator. Variety is the spice of life, so variety of level designs really does mean that spicy old Gauntlet makes it through to round 2. For the Commodore 64, we're going with the charts from the premier C64 magazine for the UK, which is Zap64. Now, in January and February, the top of the charts was dominated by Leaderboard Golf from Access Software. But from March all the way to November, it was World Games from Epix that took the top spot, leaving only one space on the charts, which was Last Ninja from System 3 in December. I have to ask, what is it with C64 owners and sports games back in the 80s? World Games absolutely dominates this year, and its only competitor is Leaderboard Golf. There are no other games, apart from one right at the end of the year, that even got close to the top. It's ridiculous. If you were a sports fan who didn't want to go out and actually do some sports back in 1987, it seems the Commodore 64 was the computer for you. Anyway, Leaderboard Golf and World Games now have to compete with one another to see who goes through to the next round. Leaderboard Golf is one of the best golf games that you can play on an 8-bit system. It's just great. I was rather partial to Lynx Golf on the PC back in the 90s, and Leaderboard's style makes me think Lynx took a fair bit of inspiration from it, let's put it that way. The controls are so easy to learn, and the player isn't inundated with too much information on the screen at once, so the actual game of golf is front and centre, which is just how I like it. The courses are interesting to play, the graphics are decent enough, although nothing mind-blowing, and it's just very fun for a game of golf. If you enjoy old golf games, this is definitely one to pick up. World Games, on the other hand, is yet another in a long line of joystick-breaking waggleathons that has no reason to be played today. The skill in these games basically comes down to who can move the joystick backward and forward at the correct rhythm to please the computer. It's a terrible game with no replay value outside of nostalgia. If you want to play a sports game, play a modern one because they at least try to replicate the sport they're on about. This is not a good game. So the decision is clear when it comes to the Commodore 64. Leaderboard Golf takes an easy win and goes through to round 2. For the ZX Spectrum, we're going with Crash. It's still the premier ZX Spectrum magazine, so it gets to present the chart. In January, the top spot was taken by Ghosts and Goblins from Elite. Then Paperboy tops it for February and March, which means Paperboy from Elite is in our contest. After that, the year is dominated by US Gold's release of Gauntlet. It goes from April all the way up to November, which means that unless Ghosts and Goblins comes back in December at the top of the charts, we're only going to have 2 from the Spectrum to contend with this year. But Ghosts and Goblins doesn't manage it. Enduro Racer takes the top spot for December, which means Gauntlet and Paperboy are competing with one another to see who goes through to round 2. Paperboy is one of the best games I've ever played on a Spectrum. While the graphics are a little monochrome here and there, and the sound isn't all that fantastic, although what is here is pretty good, it's just not brilliant, the gameplay of the arcade original is present and correct. It's smooth, it's very responsive, and the game is just as addictive now as it ever was. This was a favourite as a child when I played it on my cousin's Rubber Key Spectrum, and it's still a favourite now. Gauntlet, on the other hand, will not win the Spectrum any awards for best graphics, but what's on display is definitely workable. The colours are used effectively so the enemies stand out from the items to pick up, which makes it very easy to play the game, and the controls are fluid. They're highly responsive, which you need for a fast-paced game like this, and it all felt just so easy to play. It was great. There are very few sounds, but then again, the original game wasn't exactly the most intensive on the old ears, although it would have been nice to have some of the digitised sound if it was possible, just to make it a more authentic port of the arcade game. But what sounds are here, and a little bit of music too, is done well with the Specky's beeper, and all in all, the game is excellent. I definitely recommend it. But the question has to be, which of these 2 amazing arcade games gets to go through to round 2? Well, it has been a tough choice this year for the Spectrum, but my vote has to go with Paperboy. It's simply the best you can make an arcade port on the Spectrum, and it hammers home the win. So, at the end of round 1, we now have 3 games to pit against one another in round 2. For the ZX Spectrum, we have Paperboy. For the Commodore 64, we have Leaderboard Golf. And for the Amstrad Cpc, we have Gauntlet. Now, this is actually going to be quite a difficult decision because these 3 games are great. They're all stone cold classics. They represent some of the best games on each system and also some of the best games just overall. So I've got to now pit these against one another and find out which one gets Game of the Year, which one gets the silver, and which one gets the bronze. It's going to be a tough decision. So let's have a quick look at those games again, while I decide how we're going to do this. Paperboy for the ZX Spectrum brings fun, fast-paced arcade action to the mix. The graphics aren't the best, and the sound is almost entirely absent, but the game, that's a lot of fun. It has a huge amount of replay value, and it's a great experience. Leaderboard Golf on the Commodore 64 is one of the best golf games that you can play, and it's just as much fun now as it was back when it was released. It's a game that really has stood the test of time. Gauntlet is a wonderful looking arcade action game with a wide variety of levels on offer and branching paths that you can take through those levels, which gives it a lot of replay value. It's a standout classic arcade port for the Amstrad Cpc. Okay, let's do this. Let's put these games into order. It's been a hard decision, and if I'm absolutely honest with you, I'd give them all first place, if I could, but that's not what the rules are here. Only one can win. So here we go. In third place, it's Leaderboard Golf on the Commodore 64. In second place, it's Gauntlet on the Amstrad Cpc, which means in first place we have Paperboy on the ZX Spectrum. So there you are. The GameHammer Game of the Year for 1987 is Paperboy on the ZX Spectrum. This was a tough decision. Like I said, if I could have, I would have awarded all three of these games the top spot. They would have all been Game of the Year. But that's not the rules. One of them has to be Game of the Year. So I had to pick out of quite delicate, minute details in order to separate these games. That's how good and how classic all three of these are. But I think I made the right decision. Do you think I made the right decision? That is the question. Do tell me in the comments if I've made a good choice there, or if you'd have gone for one of the others, or if you actually have a completely different top 5, 10, whatever. Let me know in the comments, because it's always worth finding fun new games, and we can all have a good time doing that. But speaking of good times, that's all we've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, remember to click that like button, share it with your friends so that they'll know some good games when they see them, and do subscribe for future videos, because there'll be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer Classic Gaming Game of the Year for 1987. Happy New Year, see you later. Oh, hi there. You caught me playing Jazz Jackrabbit, a PC game from the 90s. It's a fun old game, and one that I definitely don't mind coming back to now and again. We covered the free Christmas version of this, Holiday Hair 1995, a while back, and it was a great game, but during that episode I did explain the background of Jazz Jackrabbit. It was quite a groundbreaking experience on the PC for its time, and as a platform game it really did move the genre along for the PC platform. It was a groundbreaking experience for PC gaming at the time, and although I had played games like it on consoles before, I'd never seen it on a computer like this. But if you want an in-depth background to the game, I do recommend you watch my Holiday Hair video. So what do you say to taking a proper look at this original game in today's episode? I really hope you didn't just say yes, because I can't actually hear you. There is a screen between us, look. See? So, shall we just get on? As with so many shareware games of the era, Jazz Jackrabbit is split into chapters. Typically you would get chapter 1 for free as a way of introducing you to the game. If you liked it, you'd buy the full game with the other chapters in it. You can play it in any order you like, in a similar way to how Mega Man goes, where you can pick up the boss that you want and then you fight through and you pick up the next boss that you want. You can do it like that, but if you want the proper full story, you have to start from chapter 1 and work your way all the way through to the final chapter. But that's not even the final chapter, because if you get Jazz Jackrabbit on CD, there are extra chapters afterward, in a similar way to how you would get an expansion pack back in the old days, or DLC these days. So the end is not actually the end if you've got the final CD version. But let's get back to the story. It's not actually that hard to follow. Let me explain. Jazz Jackrabbit is a kind of hare. He's in love with Eva Earlong, who is also a kind of hare, or perhaps a rabbit. She's a different colour, she may be a different species. She's the princess of planet Caritas, because of course she is. And she's been kidnapped by Jazz's nemesis, because this is a video game and those are the rules. His nemesis's name is Devon Shell, and he's a tortoise. This game is very loosely based on the idea of the story of the tortoise and the hare. So you have Jazz the hare versus Devon the tortoise. You won't see Devon much because he's got an army and he's going to use all this army of tortoise people and other weird freaks to go and try and kill Jazz for him. Devon will either be fleeing from planet to planet in a race to stay one step ahead of Jazz, or Jazz has the worst sense of direction ever. Like, he's got worse sense of direction than I do when I'm trying to get somewhere without the aid of a map. But either way, you're going to have to battle through planet after planet in each chapter of the game before you get a shot of fighting Devon. Naturally, it turns out that you're not fighting Devon, but perhaps someone who looks like him, or Devon will just run away at the end of the battle because this game runs on Super Mario rules, so you only get to rescue the princess at the end of the final chapter. Got that? Good. Let's play the game. First of all, this is a fast-paced game, and you're going to get hit with a lot of quick-moving colours, so expect the experience to be a little bit jarring, at least at first. I get travel sickness very easily, and this game set that off when I began playing it, but I did get used to it, and you probably will too. The experience is very much like playing Zool for the first time in that respect. Zool isn't the only game that this reminded me of though. Take a look at these bonus stages, and you will see what game springs to mind. That's right, it's a combination of Mario Kart and the special stages from the Sonic games. There's no denying it, this is very, very highly referencing. Let's put it that way. I won't say blatant rip-off, I will say definite referencing. It's also using the same type of 2.5D techniques that were used in those early, not quite 3D games to render a seemingly 3D space using 2D sprites. When I first saw the game, it was like it was using a similar set of techniques to Wacky Wheels. You might remember Wacky Wheels, and initially I thought they were coded by the same people, but apparently they're not. It just seems like that, and it seems like in 1994, faking 3D using 2D sprites was all the rage. Jazz moves fluidly, and the game runs at a superb speed, which really helps demonstrate the power of the PC, and back then that was important. Because prior to games like Jazz Jackrabbit, my experience with PC gaming was that it was a lot slower, and a lot more like the games on computers like the ZX Spectrum back in the 80s. Games didn't really scroll, they didn't have a huge amount of colour, and in all honesty, they were pretty lacklustre compared to what I'd been experiencing on 8-bit computers, but I'd moved over to an enhanced 16-bit system. It didn't make sense. Then this green rabbit showed up on my screen and it kicked the PC up the backside. All of a sudden, gaming was like, it was good, it was fantastic. It was the gaming that I had hoped for when I had first put my eyes on an Amstrad Mega PC, the big 16-bit system that I'd been idolising in Amstrad magazines while I'd been playing on my trusty old Amstrad Cpc. It was the game that I expected the PC to be, the game of the future, and I liked it. So you could say I was impressed, because I was. Basically, this is the start of the PC aiming its sights on the Amiga's dominance of home computer gaming. When I'd moved over to the PC 2 years before Jazz was released, I was hoping games would be like this. I really wanted stuff like this, and I was disappointed that often I wasn't getting that kind of gaming experience. My friends were off playing the Amiga and they had stuff like Fire and Ice, the 3D game Nightmare, and stuff like that. K240, remember that? That was a great game. Meanwhile, I had a very low colour version of SimCity and a burning desire to play something that made it look like the PC's power had been unlocked. Jazz Jackrabbit wasn't the hero we deserved, but for PC gaming in '94, he was the hero we needed right then. So the game plays like an explosion in a paint factory. It's bright, it's full of clashing colours, it's superb to look at. The game is a work of art. It also has one of the best soundtracks of any game in the 90s. It's a pleasure for both the eyes and the ears, and I love it. Sadly, I didn't get to fully appreciate the sound back then, because when I first played the game, it was on an Amstrad Cpc, which came with a built-in AdLib sound card. Now, don't get me wrong, AdLib is good. However, it was never used to its full potential, let's put it that way. It was very much the sound card equivalent of how I felt with PC games, because AdLib could do a lot more than it was given credit for, but all the games were designed to take full advantage of the Sound Blaster card, which I didn't have. So these days, with better compatibility between different manufacturers, there's a lot less of that kind of problem, but back then, in the early days of PC gaming, you paid your money and you took your chance. The game starts off easy. You jump, you shoot, and you occasionally find a secret area on your way through the level. Basically, this whole first chapter feels more like a tutorial. You can kind of understand why. It's surprisingly easy to finish, even on your first try, and it's a nice way of easing you into the game. Episode 2 is where the game proper gets going. You're going to get absolutely hammered into the ground if you don't hone your reflexes, because enemies will fly at you from off screen without a second's warning, so you have to keep your eyes peeled and your wits sharp or you will not make it out of Chapter 2 alive. And the game doesn't let up from there. If you thought PC gaming in the early era couldn't compete with consoles, well, you were right for the most part, but when Jazz Jackrabbit came along, you were dead wrong. This looks like a Mega Drive game, but its roots are right there in Nintendo, as in Nintendo hard. Except for the boss levels. If you've ever thought Sonic's battles against Dr. Robotnik were a little bit easy, well, take a look at this. I'm fighting an end of chapter boss, and I'm not even walking into the area that he's roaming about in. This may seem like a cop-out, but it's basically how boss battles work in this game. Just find somewhere to take cover and shoot the enemy until it explodes. It's the best way, and it works. It might seem cheap, and it is cheap, but it's also essentially how the game is designed. Keep out the way of the shots, and you will shoot back, and you will hit, and it will die. That's how it works. In conclusion, this is a cornerstone of PC gaming history. It plays a lot like a mascot platformer. Its roots feel more like a run-and-gun arcade shooter though, a bit like Contra, that kind of thing, or Green Beret. It's one of those games that marked the time in history when the PC finally came into its own as more than the beige box that your parents did their taxes on. Jazz Jackrabbit could have been the mascot for the PC if he'd starred in a few more games. But sadly, that wasn't to be. In November of 1993, Doom was released, and it ended the platformer as the game genre of choice for PC gamers. So while Jazz showed that our beloved giant monstrosity of a computer could do all of the things that console gamers and Amiga gamers loved, he ended up essentially being a mascot for a time that was already over. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have a fond place in our hearts, and all of our gaming memories. For my part, I didn't get my hands on a copy of Doom until after the demos of its sequel started doing the rounds, showing up on magazine cover discs and being handed around at school. So, for me, Jazz Jackrabbit did get his day in the sun, and as far as my friends and I were concerned, it was a great game. Personally, I think that was probably the best way you could experience it. I could see the fun, and the game was great. It was everything that I'd wanted for a PC game. But it was the kind of game that couldn't compete once Doom Guy came and blew everything out of the water. So, play it before Doom. And you can't do that anymore. It's one of those games where you had to be there at the time to fully appreciate how groundbreaking it was. But that's not really the end of it all, is it? Because you can still go back and look at it from this point of view. This was a game that was there to show the PC had its abilities to compete with the other computers. In that respect, Jazz did his job. He came in, he showed what the future of platformers on the PC could be. He came late, but he did arrive. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So thanks, Jazz. Thank you for the memories. And I hope we get to see you again one day. He's Popeye the Sailor Man. He lives in a caravan. He opens a door and falls through the floor. He's Popeye the Sailor Man. What the hell is going on?
Mind your head, Popeye! Mind your head!
I'm not Popeye, I'm Zoe.
You were playing a game about Popeye and singing about Popeye. That's close enough for me. I'm not picky.
Where are you getting all those skulls from?
Never you mind.
some days I just wonder why I bother.
So does everyone else.
Whoa! That, if I'm not mistaken, is the sea hag from the Popeye comics. Popeye was a very popular character from the very early days of newspaper comics, back when the newspaper would have the news, the comments section, the sports pages, and the funny pages, where you would have a strip of basically a few cartoons and comics. There was something for the adults, something for the kids, a little bit of light entertainment. So, originally though, Popeye wasn't the main character. He was a guest star in Thimble Theatre. If you don't know what that is, it was a comic starring Harold Hamgravy, yes, that was his name, and Olive Oyl. Olive later dumped Harold, she was originally his girlfriend, and got with Popeye the Sailor Man, so once that happened, Harold's time in the paper was basically over. That's why the game's not called Harold. How did you get in here?
I let him in. This show needed a guest star, someone with real clout to get the audience in.
And you thought a 93-year-old sailor would do that?
Hi, I'm right here.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Just go with it, will you? There's an arcade game and 3 versions for the home consoles of the era, and Popeye's here to help you talk about them.
Yeah, let's get to it, will ya? I've got other shows to pop up on after this one, you know.
Fine, fine. If I review your game, will you help me out with the sea hag?
Oh, she's easy to sort out. Just punch the skulls when she throws them, and you'll get extra points. Watch.
That's not fair.
Neither's your face.
I'm not gonna stand for this. If I'm not appreciated here, I'll go elsewhere. I could have been a star, you know.
Oh, I don't doubt it. A star's just a giant ball of gas, and you've got that in spades.
Screw you, sailor boy.
Join the queue, lady. Okay, she's gone. You ready to start the review?
A deal's a deal. Let's get started. Here's Popeye on the NES. Popeye was a launch title for the Famicom in Japan, along with Donkey Kong and its sequel, Donkey Kong Jr. While all 3 are highly polished games, you could be forgiven for thinking that they all feel very similar, an issue that was raised during the original release of the game in the arcades. Electronic Games magazine outright stated that it was a derivative of Donkey Kong, which is a little harsh, but it should nevertheless come as no surprise to anyone who knows the history of that game. Basically, Donkey Kong is the first draft of Popeye, but apparently Nintendo couldn't get the licensing sorted in time, so they switched all the characters out for their own in-house designs. Bluto became Donkey Kong, Olive Oyl became Pauline, and Popeye became Jumpman, who later became Mario. When Nintendo got the licensing sorted, they suddenly found themselves with a license, but no game. So what's an arcade company to do in that case? Well, switch the sprites back to how they were intended? Could do.
No, of course not. They're going to make a whole new game just for me.
Damn right they are. And they'll get it ported to every home system under the sun, too.
Got to give the public what it wants.
The game is fairly simple, with 3 levels to progress through before the game loops back to the beginning and increases in difficulty. There's the opening stage on the docks, the town stage, and then out at sea on a sailing ship, which I'm going to assume is the Spinnacher, Popeye's trusty vessel. On each level, Popeye has to collect a certain number of items that fall from the top of the screen to the bottom. On level 1, it's hearts, thrown by Olive Oyl. On level 2, it's musical notes from Olive singing. And on level 3, it's rungs of a ladder that Popeye needs to build in order to rescue Olive.
You'd have thought I'd be able to just climb the mast thanks to my amazing muscles. But apparently not.
If the items reach the bottom, Popeye only has a small amount of time to collect them before he loses a life. Collect enough items and the level ends, moving the action on to the next one. Bluto is here on every level, trying to prevent Popeye achieving his goal, because Bluto is a prick. He has several methods of attacking Popeye, ranging from punching him in the face if he grabs Popeye on the same platform, to reaching down from a higher platform so he can throttle Popeye, or leaping up from a lower platform to grab Popeye by his unmentionables.
And yet you'd still mention them. What's going on there?
Shut up. Popeye can grab a can of spinach to boost his strength, giving him enough power to punch Bluto so hard he'll bounce around the screen. It's a fun move, but the spinach doesn't regenerate very quickly, if at all, in some versions of the game, so you'll need to time grabbing it precisely, otherwise you'll not catch Bluto before the spinach power runs out. On each level, there are 2 hazards. The Sea Hag will throw skulls at you from one side of the screen to the other, and she'll appear on either side in rapidly increasing progression of difficulty, because that's how the game works, is how it makes it harder. Meanwhile, Bluto is going to throw beer bottles at you, and he's going to do it really, really fast every time he sees you.
Punch the bottles out of the air for extra points!
And so you don't get hit by them. Getting hit by them loses you a point. On level 2, the Sea Hag also throws skulls, but level 3 mixes things up a bit by having the Sea Hag throw skulls while a giant bird will attack. That's fun.
Don't forget the punching bag.
I was just getting to that. There's a punching bag on level 1, which can drop on Bluto's head for extra points. It's a one-time event, and it's very easy to miss your strike, so practice will definitely make perfect on that one. Level 2 replaces the punching bag with something easier to handle. Sweet Pea is floating from a balloon, bobbing up and down at the top left of the screen. If you can time your jump on the seesaw that Wimpy is standing on, you can jump high enough to reach Sweet Pea, which gets you extra points. Level 3 doesn't have any of that, you just have to punch the bird for extra points.
Animal cruelty for high scores!
In all honesty, the comparisons to Donkey Kong are a little harsh with this game. This is closer in style to Donkey Kong Jr., with all of its clear progression of the climb and dodge gameplay. And to be honest with you, it's still a lot of good fun now. If you get a chance to play the arcade game, do definitely take that chance, because this is a real classic from the early arcade era.
But the question is, did it survive being ported to the home systems?
Let's find out. In a word, yes. When ported to the NES, Nintendo made sure to keep everything intact. This is one of the original black box titles which launched at the dawn of the NES's life. And it's clear Nintendo were trying to make this as close to the arcade experience as possible. The graphics are wonderful, albeit not quite as detailed as those in the arcade, but they work very well, and it's very clear what everything is. All the levels are here, although, let's face it, there weren't that many, so cutting 1 or 2 out would definitely have stood out, and there are 2 gameplay styles to choose from, which give veteran players more of a challenge. If there's one criticism I have for the NES version, it's that Bluto doesn't feel quite as aggressive here as he did in the arcades on the standard setting, but when you play on the alternative version, he's definitely more like his arcade counterpart. That gives the option of a nice introduction for new players, which is great, but veterans won't find that much of a challenge on the first version. The controls are spot on, I can't fault them. If you want as close to the arcade experience as you can get on a home console, the NES version of Popeye is the game that you need. I can't fault it, it's one of my favourite games on the system.
Is that why you bought it twice?
Well, to be fair, I didn't realise I had. But it's true, I actually do have 2 copies of Popeye on the NES, but one of them is a weird ROM hack. This is Popeye on the N Joypad, a Famiclone system with a load of built-in pirated games. The controllers for it are low budget, but they do the job well enough, and it's a surprisingly fun system to play on, as mentioned in my review of the system in episode 77. It contains a copy of Popeye, but most of the graphics are altered in a very slapdash attempt to hide the fact that the game is pirated from Nintendo. Popeye on the N Joypad was renamed to Let Loose, which makes no sense at all, but the gameplay is still here. In this version, you're a pig, and you're trying to dodge a conspicuously aggressive tramp while you collect falling items. Also, Olive Oil is now a penguin, because why wouldn't she be? And nothing else makes sense. It's a weird looking mess, but it plays well and it's still fun. This was the first version of Popeye I ever played, and it made me a fan of the game. So it's clearly doing something right. The fun and the quality of the original Nintendo port is still there, despite the change in the weird graphics by the pirates to slap this version together. If you get a chance to play this version, it's worth it, but I wouldn't go out of my way for it. So, shall we move on? Yeah. What's up next?
Have you played Atari today?
Have you been waiting a long time to say that advert?
All day.
Let's play. The Atari 2600 is one of the oldest consoles around, often regarded as the console that started the home gaming revolution, and with good reason. It's nevertheless a very early example of 8-bit gaming, and that's why its games often look so primitive. This is a surprisingly good port of Popeye from the arcade, however. The graphics are all blocky and solid colours, even though the Atari can absolutely use multicoloured sprites if you know how to code it. Just take a look at Commando on the 2600 for an excellent example of that. There's also a fair amount of sprite flicker, since the 2600 doesn't have hardware sprites, and also doesn't have a very fast processing speed. Combining both of those means the system doesn't have enough cycles to overwrite a sprite with the background in quick enough time to hide the overwrite and redraw cycle that allows sprites to move. That's not a criticism, however. For example, I've done that in some of my games. You see some of my early basic attempts at games, you'll notice a lot of sprite flicker. It's just because there isn't enough time in the cycles to be able to overwrite properly. It's not a criticism, it's just how it is. Atari games have a fair amount of flicker. It's just one of the things you have to live with when you're playing Atari. The sounds get annoying, especially the walking sound. I've never been a fan of audible walking sounds on early games because it's just annoying blips and clicks. The Popeye theme tune, however, when you grab a can of spinach, is really well done. The Sea Hag is here, and a lot more aggressive from the start than she was on the NES, and all 3 levels are present, although there has been a significant alteration to the town level. The basic mechanics of the town are the same, but Sweet Pea is gone, Wimpy is gone, and the level now has 2 trampolines, making it symmetrical. The changes aren't a deal breaker by any means, but some of them are questionable, like the need to make level 2 look exactly the same on both sides. What's that about? It's a weird design choice, but the core essence of Popeye is still here, so that's great. If you have an Atari and don't have access to Popeye on the NES, this is a very good alternative.
What about Atari's rival, the Chucklevision?
You mean the Intellivision?
I thought that was a kids' TV show.
No, I think you've been drinking too much.
Don't try to change me, Hammer Girl. I am what I am.
As you would expect for the first 16-bit console, the Intellivision boasts more colourful graphics and better sound than the Atari. Despite this, Olive Oil is still a single colour, barely defined sprite, which makes her stand out. Weirdly, in fact, compared to the full colour Popeye and Bluto. Everything plays really nicely, and this is a near-perfect conversion from the arcade original, although Wimpy is still missing. I have to say, near perfect because Sweet Pea is missing from level 2 and the Sea Hag is far less aggressive on the Intellivision. Despite these downsides, Popeye on the Intellivision is a fun version of the game. I wouldn't put it on top of my list of preferred versions, but it is a good one, and until I got a copy of the NES version, it was my personal favourite. If you get the chance, try to give it a try. It works surprisingly well, even on these weird disc-shaped controllers. Look at that. What's that about?
So is that all of them? Are we done with the home ports?
Well, no. There are other versions, like the Commodore 64, the Odyssey 2, the Texas Instruments, and others as well. There was even a mobile phone version later on.
So are we playing any of those?
Sadly not. I don't actually have copies of those ones, and I can't play them if I don't have a copy. There is one more game that I do have, though, so shall we have a look at it? Long thought lost, the ZX Spectrum clone of Popeye was uploaded to World of Spectrum in September 2020. This isn't an official port as far as I can tell, it's more like a fan clone of the game. Nevertheless, the levels are all here and they do look great. It's a far more difficult version of Popeye than you would expect after playing the other ports, but the core feel of the game is still here. Popeye looks great, even if his name is misspelled on the title screen, and this feels very much like a Spectrum port of the arcade version, only with a higher difficulty setting. It's fast, it's fun, and I'm actually glad it was eventually tracked down because it is good to play it, and I think we'll all enjoy it. All in all, Popeye made the transition from the arcade to the home computers and consoles incredibly well, although it was somewhat derided as a Donkey Kong clone, which I think is unfair because it is its own game with its own charms. It's still good enough to keep people coming back to it after 40 years from its release. I mean, I'm still playing it here. It's still great. Or, you might even say, it's strong to the finish.
It must eat its spinach.
It's Popeye the arcade game. Hello and welcome back to the Retrovator, the home of retro classic gaming here on the GameHammer Classic Gaming channel. Oh yes. It's the end of the year and that can only mean one thing. It's time to determine what is the game of the year for our chosen retro year. This year it's 1988, and long-time viewers of the channel will know what the rules of this are. We go by the top 3 game systems, whether it's a console or a computer from that year, and we determine which of those games for that system that came out that year and topped the charts gets to be that system's game of the year, and then those 3 games compete against one another to see who will be GameHammer Classic Gaming's Game of the Year for 1988. Let's take a look. In 1988, the 8-bit computer still ruled the roost, so our 3 competitors will be the usual suspects. First of all, we have the king of the 8-bits, the ZX Spectrum. We shall be determining its top games by checking which titles reached the #1 spot in the top Spectrum magazine of the day, Crash. Next up, we have the prince of the 8-bits, the Commodore 64. Its magazine of choice remains Zap 64, but it's a bit of a change late in the year for this long-running magazine, because in November 1988, the end of the 8-bits is on the horizon. Zap 64 changes its name to include the dreaded 8-bit killer. Yes, that's right, the Commodore Amiga 500 is here, and while it isn't going to be destroying our beloved computers just yet, it's starting to settle in and mark its territory. Finally, we have the Grand Vizier of the 8-bits, the Amstrad Cpc. Lord Sugar's big black box of delights can't be represented by its premier CPC magazine this year because Amstrad Action still doesn't have a regular charts page. Get with it, guys, come on! Instead, the Amstrad will be represented by Amstrad Computer User. Despite being the official Amstrad magazine and therefore usually disqualified from representing the system on account of the perceived bias, ACU's charts are compiled independently by Gallup, so it does allow it to be here. We're going to start proceedings by looking at the Commodore 64, and as usual, we're going to be looking at which game topped the charts in each month. If a game tops the charts for 2 or more months, it gets to be eligible for competing in this challenge. So, what top titles did we have from Zap 64 in 1988? Let's take a look. The Christmas 1987 special issue, which was labelled as January 1988 because that's how publishing works, and no, it was just as ridiculous back then as it is now, has the ever-fantastic Last Ninja in first place on the Zap Readers chart. According to the listings, it also held that spot the previous month, and wouldn't you know it, it's still there in February as well. California Games manages to knock it off the top spot for March, however, which continues the theme we spotted in the Commodore charts. C64 owners in the 80s just couldn't get enough of their sports game simulators, could they? California Games stays at the top in April, May and June too, which means I now have to play this bloody thing because it's a contender. So I hope you can appreciate my plight here, guys, because sports games in the 80s tended to be, let's waggle the joystick back and forth really hard and whoever gets wanker's crap the hardest gets to win. So, is that going to be what happens with California Games? Watch on and find out. Next up, Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit tops the charts in July, but it's not really a game, is it? Nevertheless, it finally does knock that bloody sports game off the top of the list, so hats off to it. Not that it lasts for long though, cause bloody California bloody Games is bloody back at the bloody top of the bloody charts in bloody August. September sees the first major shake-up though, because now the new titles are starting to filter through from the major summer releases. Bubble Bobble tops the charts this time, and still there in October, November and December too. So if we were just going off the total number of months that a game stayed at the top of the charts, California Games would win this hands down. Thankfully, that's not how we do things here. We're actually going to have a look at the games and play them and pitch them against one another in order to determine which will be the Commodore 64's contender for Game of the Year. So, just to recap, we have The Last Ninja, California Games, and Bubble Bobble, which will get through to fight against the contenders coming in from the ZX Spectrum and Amstrad Cpc. Let's take a look at each game and make a decision. Many Commodore 64 fans view The Last Ninja as one of the crowning classics of the system, and I can definitely see why. This is a game that's easy to get to grips with and very easy to like. You're a ninja and a lot of people are in your way in this isometric action game that feels more like a spy thriller that you'd see on late night TV than a standard ninja game. It's definitely a lot of fun, and the rather low detail graphics actually help to enhance the atmosphere. So I definitely recommend this one. As an added bonus, the soundtrack is simply fantastic. Okay, I'm willing to admit that California Games was a lot better than I was expecting. I actually found the interesting variety of sports quite enjoyable on this one, and the emphasis on doing a variety of special moves rather than simply waggling the joystick back and forward was great. I still can't see why it was at the top of the charts for quite so long, when so many other great games came out in 1988, but this is a long stride forward in the genre of early computer sports sims, so I'll take it. Then finally, we have the arcade classic Bubble Bobble, which has survived its port to the Commodore 64 with almost no drop in quality. There's a little bit of slowdown compared to the original, but the fun is still here, the challenge is still high, it looks great, it sounds great, and it's just plain fun. I definitely recommend it if you haven't given it a try yet. So there we have it, 3 verifiable classics. Last Ninja, California Games, Bubble Bobble. Which one will go through? Well, for this year, for the Commodore 64, I have to give it to Bubble Bobble. And the reason for that is, it's an arcade classic done really well. Veterans can play it and enjoy it. Casual people and newcomers can play it and enjoy it. Everyone can just sit down and have a go, and it's great. You don't have to try and work at it a bit like Last Ninja to really see what's really there, because it is a good game, but it requires you to learn it and play by its rules. Similarly, California Games, you can just sit down as a casual player and enjoy it, but again, you have to work at it a little bit to try and get a grip of how it wants you to do all the moves. Bubble Bobble doesn't require any of that. You sit down, you play it, you know how to play it almost straight away. It is the better of the games for that reason. Might be a bit subjective in terms of views there, but that's the rules of the game. So Bubble Bobble goes through to the next round, where it will compete with the contenders from the Amstrad Cpc and the ZX Spectrum. Speaking of the Spectrum, let's take a look at what it's got to offer. Crash Magazine remains the magazine of choice for the ZX Spectrum charts, but it provides us 2 problems in its Christmas issue. Firstly, there are 3 charts, and secondly, they printed the damn thing in anaglyph 3D, the kind that you use those silly old red-blue 3D specs for. Thankfully, I have some of those silly red-green spectacles. Woo! Ooh, everything looks 3D. I can practically feel it. So I was able to analyze their charts and glean from it the information that we need. And we're going to be looking at the Hotline all-time top 30, because that seems to cover the most games. This chart gives us our first number 1 spot, which is Match Day, because 80s computer users couldn't get enough of sports. It's knocked right off the top spot in February though, because Exelon takes the lead. Match Day 2 lands at number 1 in March, but Exelon is back on top in April, giving us our first game to reach the runoff stage. Don't worry though, football fans, Match Day 2 equalises in May and scores again in June. Renegade makes a much needed flying kick to land at the number 1 spot in July, but Match Day 2 is back on top in August. There is just no stopping this football classic. Target Renegade takes the September top spot and manages to keep it in October as well, giving us a 3rd game in the arena. November sees Target Renegade manage its 3rd month at the top, but we have a bit of a problem in December because there isn't a reader's chart. Thankfully, the Crash staff have put together their own list of highly recommended software, so we can use that in its place. Just this once though, because if they drop the chart in 89, we'll have to find another magazine for next year's show. Topping this list of recommended software is 1943, a fantastic vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up that sadly can't make it through to the next round because it only tops the chart in this 1 month. So there we are. After 12 top spots, we have 3 games to compete for the ZX Spectrum's Game of the Year. They are Exelon, Matchday 2 and Target Renegade. Now we need to have a look at each of the games and find out which will go forward. Let's do that. Exelon is a rather nice, if relatively simple, run-and-gun game with one twist. You need to use your rocket-propelled grenades to destroy scenery as you go along. You only have a limited number of grenades, so it's important that you use them in the right spot and at the right time if you want to make progress. It's colourful, the sprites are big and really look pretty good, and overall, I have to admit, I really did enjoy playing this one. It's definitely worth a go. Matchday 2 is a decent football game for the time, with nice graphics and a great addition over its predecessor. There's now an indicator above the head of the player you're controlling. That might not seem like much these days, but back in the day, it was a literal game changer. It's a little slow and the graphics aren't exactly colourful, but all the ingredients of a very fun football game are here. If you've got a friend over to play some games and you both enjoy football, you're gonna have a good time with this one. Renegade was an amazing game that changed the world of beat-em-up gaming when it was released. Can the sequel top it? In a word, yes. It's far easier to do all the special moves this time around, which I have to put down to it being a slight tweak of the game engine, because there's not a lot of difference in how the game plays compared to the original, so I have to wonder if this is actually running on nothing more than a modified version of the same engine from the original game. I'd like to say something a little more than if you enjoyed Renegade, you'll enjoy Target Renegade because it's more of it, but that does really sum up the situation. Still, more Renegade is always welcome, so this one is definitely worth a look. But only one of these games can be our Game of the Year for the ZX Spectrum. We have Matchday 2, Target Renegade, and Exelon. 3 games. Which goes through? Well, it came down in the end to 2, a choice between 2. We have Target Renegade and Matchday 2. They're sequels that pretty much eclipse their originals, and that's why they stood out against Exelon. But which of these 2 can go through? The answer has to be Matchday 2, and the simple fact is that it does eclipse the original. When you play Target Renegade, you can still go back and play Renegade, and you'll have a good time. They're both really good games. But when it comes to Matchday 2, the enhancements just knock the original out of the park. This is the game. It's the definitive version of Matchday. So that's why it takes the top spot and goes through to compete against Bubble Bobble and whatever the Amstrad Cpc has as its Game of the Year. What will that be? Let's find out. With Amstrad Action still not having a chart despite being the premier Amstrad magazine, we're using the Gallup charts printed in Amstrad Computer User to determine the contenders. From this we find Grand Prix Simulator from Codemasters starts us off by topping the January list. Codemasters manages to keep the top spot in February, but this time it's using Pro Ski Simulator. March sees the top 2 spots taken up by compilation packs, which don't count for our purposes of determining a Game of the Year because they're always repackages of older games that have already had their chance to get to the top. We'll therefore be using the game in 3rd position on the March chart for this contest, which means Grand Prix Simulator is the first game to go through to the arena. Outrun takes the top spot in April, which has to be some kind of April Fool's joke, surely, because it's an atrocious port of a terrible specky version of the arcade classic. Basically, it's a copy of a copy, and you know what that always means. Somehow, it's still at the top spot in May though, so I guess the guys in marketing must have really worked hard. Ghostbusters hits home with a bang in June and manages to cling on into July, but Steve Davis Snooker makes it pocket the black in August, stealing the number 1 position as it goes. Nobody can knock it off the table in September, which means it's through to the arena as well. October sees the arrival of the famous Football Manager 2 on the scene, which lands firmly at number 1 in the charts, and clings on in November too. But its victory can't last forever, because Bomb Jack blows it off the top spot in December. Leave it to the Amstrad to give us quite a challenge. No 3 games here to compete here. Instead we have 5. Oh my goodness, 5! Which 5? Grand Prix Simulator, Outrun, Ghostbusters, Steve Davis Snooker, and Football Manager 2. Which of these 5 games can become number 1 in the arena? Well, let's blow the whistle and find out. Where's my whistle?
I know we promised you a whistle, but we had some budget cuts, so just pretend to blow the whistle and we'll fix it in the dub.
I can't believe I'm doing this. Here we go. Hey! Grand Prix Simulator is one of those top-down racing games that were incredibly popular for a ridiculously long time. You even saw games like this on the 16-bit systems where they would have been far more capable of showing off something more sophisticated, and far more enjoyable as well. That said, this isn't a bad game. It's quite fun, in fact. Sliding around the course, because you can't possibly describe what we're doing here as driving, is well implemented, and it's fun to glide past an opponent that has hit a barrier or got caught in one of the many hazards that are strewn over the track. It is decent fun. Outrun on the CPC is a disgrace, plain and simple. While the title tune is good and the loading screen is amazing, you will be severely disappointed when you actually get to play the game. Movement isn't fast enough to replicate the Outrun feel, the opponent vehicles seem to swerve to hit you at random, and there's no road. You're driving on grass with lines painted on it. If any game needs a revamp by modern retro developers who actually know what they're doing, it's Outrun. Thank goodness for the upcoming Vespertino game. That's all I can say about this one. Avoid. I've already covered Ghostbusters in a past review, so I won't go into detail here. Suffice to say, it's not a great game to play now, but when I first bought it as a 5-year-old kid, I absolutely loved it. It's a clunky mess of a business simulator with Ghostbusters elements stuck onto it, but it's not a good Ghostbusters game. Steve Davis Snooker, on the other hand, may not look like much when you first see it, and if you ever decide to play it, for goodness sake, turn off the crosshair movement sound or you'll go insane. When you play it though, it is a fantastic snooker simulator, presented in the traditional top-down style that stayed with the snooker sims almost as long as top-down driving games were around. It's one of the best snooker games on the Amstrad, and it's definitely worth sinking some time into. Without a doubt, Football Manager 2 is the greatest football management game that was available until Championship Manager arrived on the PC. On the Amstrad systems, Football Manager 2 is a graphically impressive, in-depth and highly enjoyable game that will suck you in. It's deep, but not too deep that newcomers will be put off, and even casual football fans will find a lot to love about it. I highly recommend this one. How am I supposed to work under these conditions? Yeah, you better tell them that. If this continues, I'm out of here. Tell them that too.
Mr. Robinson, hello? We're on air, you know. Come on, we're on air.
I'll call you back. So we have 5 games that went through, and after all of that, we have to decide which one is going to be our number 1 for the Amstrad Cpc. Hey, it rhymes! Will it be Ghostbusters? No, it won't. Will it be Outrun? Not a chance. So what is it actually going to be? Well, the thing is, you can have a lot of fun with something like Steve Davis Snooker. You'd have a lot of fun with most of these games. They are 4 great games and Outrun. But one of them is the game that you can lose an entire evening to and not feel guilty about it, because it'll feel like you've actually done something, you've achieved something, and that is Football Manager 2. So Football Manager 2 goes through to the next round and competes against Bomb Jack and Match Day 2. It's actually 2 football games in the final this year. Interesting. So, with that said, let's have a quick look at those games again as a rehash to make sure we know what we're competing with. Let's find out which one will become our Game of the Year for 1988. On Commodore 64, we have arcade classic Bubble Bobble. Anyone can play it, anyone can enjoy it. It's just great arcade fun. For the ZX Spectrum, Match Day 2 provides pretty much the same experience. If you've got a friend around, you'll have a lot of fun with this one. If you like football, you'll have a lot of fun with this one. It's a great fun action-style sports game. And on the Amstrad Cpc, you can lose an entire evening to Football Manager 2, and you'll enjoy every single second. It's an in-depth, very fun football management simulator. It's all the bells and whistles, and you'll love it. So we've got actually quite an interesting battle this time. Who can take the top spot? Can it be Bomb Jack with its arcade gameplay? Quite possibly. Can it be Match Day 2 with its arcade-style sporty gameplay? Quite possibly. Can it be Football Manager 2? Yes. Yes, it can. Because while people can pick up and play and enjoy an hour, maybe even an hour and a half of arcade action with Bomb Jack, or you could play a lot of time with friends and enjoy every minute of it with Matchday 2. Only Football Manager will keep you going for days on end, losing days of your life and making you feel happy about it because you'll feel like you've actually done something. Football Manager 2 therefore has to take the top spot because it's such a good game. But all three are classics, and that's how we have to end it. So there you go. Football Manager 2 for the Amstrad Cpc is Game of the Year for 1988. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please do click on that like button. If you disagree with my assessments, please let me know what your Game of the Year would be down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, and perhaps we can start some kind of debate. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson. I hope you've enjoyed seeing what games were available in 1988 and what topped the charts. I'll see you next week for another interesting GameHammer Classic Gaming. Take care, and bye for now. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.